Hello, and thank you for launching this presentation entitled Turning the Tables on Shakespeare's Sonnets Part 1. My name is Eric Luskow, and today is March 16th, 2025. I'll be approaching the sonnets from an Oxfordian perspective, i.e. that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, was the author of these stunning poems historically attributed to William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford. If you're not familiar with the Shakespeare authorship question and the Oxfordian theory, I would highly recommend you visit the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, for an overview. So, first question, why 154 sonnets? It seems to be a rather odd, arbitrary number, but I will present evidence to demonstrate why I don't believe the number is arbitrary. For Oxfordians familiar with the numbers games found in the first folio, if you're not, I have two videos on my YouTube channel on this topic. 152 would make far more sense, since 15 plus 2 equals 17 would give us one of Oxford's geometric numbers. An example along the same lines, Sonnet 125, 12 plus 5 equals 17, contains one of the most telling authorship lines, "Were it aught to me, I bore the canopy," and Hamlet begins on page 152, 15 plus 2 equals 17 again, in the first folio. Thematically, according to Orthodox scholarship, sonnets 153 and 154 don't fit the major sonnet groupings of the Fair Youth, including the subset on procreation and the Dark Lady. They're considered loose adaptations of a six-line Greek epigram. Some Orthodox critics have connected 153 and 154 to the Dark Lady theme, but the connection is, I would argue, tenuous. For some Oxfordians, they can be seen as hinting at the Prince Tudor theory, but that is not the focus of this presentation. Happily, however, we do have sonnets 153 and 154, regardless of their source or connection to sonnets 1 through 152. But before I propose my theory as to why sonnets 153 and 154 were included despite being thematic outliers, here's a quick review of gematria, which is a method of connecting oneself to God through numbers. If you're not familiar with gematria and the fascination it held for the Elizabethans and Jacobeans, including our favorite author, please watch the late Alexander Waugh's outstanding YouTube videos on the Shakespeare authorship question. I could not even hope to explain it as well as he does. Also, my two videos on the first folio contain more detailed explanation as well as examples found in the first folio. In short, for our purposes here, Oxford connected himself to God with the numbers 17 and 40. 17 because he was the 17th Earl of Oxford, and 40 because he referred to himself as double V, likely derived from his motto, Vero nihil verius. As you can see, the geometric value of V is 20, so 2 20s equals 40. Again, please watch Alexander Waugh's videos, especially the episode entitled "What's in a Name? Shakespeare's Question Applied to Shakespeare," in which Waugh demonstrates how Oxford incorporated the numbers 17 and 40 into his elaborate signature. The crux of my theory laid out in my first folio videos is that the numbers 0, 1, and 2 correspond to the letters O, I, and Z, which have the geometric values of 14, 9, and 24, respectively. This is a slight deviation from Waugh, as he used the classical 23-letter Latin alphabet gematria, while I'm proposing Oxford use the Elizabethan 24-letter gematria, while continuing to treat all W's as double V's. While the interchangeability of I and 1 and 0 and O are still relatively common today, this slide shows examples of the letter Z being used as the number 2 in a 16th century text. This is just an example. There are many other examples. I've shown in my videos how 2 equals Z equals 24 is a consistent key in the numbers games in the first folio, and I'll provide additional evidence here that this Z key, along with 1 equals I equals 9 and 0 equals O equals 14, reveal Oxford's ingeniousness in connecting his works to his numbers and to God. Now back to the sonnets. We have 154 sonnets using the Shakespearean or English sonnet form of 14 lines of iambic pentameter and a primary rhyming scheme of A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G G, though Shakespeare himself will occasionally deviate from this rhyming scheme. So 154 times 14s means we should have 2,156 total lines in the sonnets. 2 plus 1 plus 5 plus 6 equals 14, which is the geometric value of the letter O. That's interesting, but do we really have 2,156 lines? First, we need to establish that Sonnet 126 has 14 lines. Lines 13 and 14 are missing, but are marked with parentheses to indicate their absence in the quarto. The two parenthetical lines are not always recognized in edited editions of the sonnets, but they are clearly marked in the original quarto and are included in my line counts. Why they are missing or who removed them is unknown. Now back to the supposed 2,156 total, which is what we should have with 154 times 14. Except Sonnet 99 has 15 lines. So counting the two parenthetical lines in Sonnet 126, we actually have 2,157 total lines. Here's Sonnet 99, and I've underlined the extra line in red, extra A line there. So looking at the number 2,157 grammatically, 57 is the total of Oxford's numbers 17 and 40, and 2 plus 1 equals 3, signifying the Trinity to connect Oxford to God. There are other theories as to why Sonnet 99 has 15 lines, but I submit here that we are once again bearing witness to Oxford's obsession with gematria. Now we're going to break down the sonnet lines by the first letter of the first word. So, for example, there are a total of 360 lines in the sonnets that begin with the letter A, 145 lines that begin with the letter B, and so on. My apologies for this being a bit small, but I wanted to show the entire list to begin with. I'll zoom in the next slides. My initial focus is on the letters O and R. There are 17 lines that begin with R and 122 lines that begin with O. The geometric value of R is 17. And as Alexander Waz observed, whenever one finds any type of letter count that corresponds to the geometric value of that letter, it's time to pay close attention. In the case of R, we get the double emphasis of 17 as one of Oxford's numbers. And I humbly submit to you, this is not accidental. Here are the 17 lines beginning with the letter R. And though I make no claim that these 17 lines form a completely cohesive sonnet on par with a real sonnet, there are certain thematic elements in them from line to line, which, though not entirely surprising, given the sonnets have two overarching themes of fair youth and a dark lady, do show signs of interrelatedness. Here are just a few examples. We have mud, an element so slow, an apology for the lack of rhyme, ruminations on the shadow of the rose, ruin, financial and reputational, a golden quill richer than wealth or title, and lastly, robbery, root, rooting out, and revenge. These last three sound like the plot of Hamlet, no? Especially that last one, 17. The 17th R line in the sonnets begins with the word revenge. However, I will leave any conclusions to you, the viewer. Now to the lines beginning with the letter O. The letter O has the obvious connection to Oxford, but as I've argued in my videos on the first folio, there are geometric games afoot here. As shown in slides 3, 4, and 5, and now here again, 0 equals O equals 14, 1 equals I equals 9, and 2 equals Z equals 24. So 122 equals IZZ equals 9 plus 24 plus 24, which equals 57, the combination of Oxford's numbers 17 and 40. Now, I'm aware that gematria can drive folks crazy, even among Oxfordians who recoil at the slightest whiff of Baconian cryptograms. But it's there for us to see and can't be avoided. As noted earlier, Oxford even incorporated it into his signature. He clearly believed in it and used it repeatedly in his works. So in addition to O, I, and Z gematria from the first folio catalog page shown in my folio videos, I'll quickly point out here evidence pertaining to the authorship question from the 3 pages in the first folio numbered 122. You may say, hold on, the folio was published in 1623 and the sonnets were published in 1609. My argument here is that whoever edited the folio knew gematria, knew the importance of the number 122, and edited accordingly. In one of his videos, Alexander Waugh mentioned a suspicion of his that Oxford may himself have been responsible for the layout of the first folio, a suspicion I hold as well, especially after discovering the many numbers games embedded here in the sonnets. And for anybody, it wouldn't take too much if you knew the line counts per page and you had the manuscripts in front of you. You could do a pretty good job of laying these out. Of course, we know that they had some complications in the laying out of the first folio, but the page 122s within the folio are consistent and did not seem to suffer much from any kind of complications. So historically, there's been a lot of debate over the sonnet sequencing. I believe the evidence I'm presenting here in this part 1 and then in a part 2 of the series show authorial intent in the original quarto sonnet ordering. And it's compelling enough to obviate the potentially difficulties that people have with the sonnet ordering. I don't think that there's any question that what we have in the quarto is the author's intention. So, first, Love's Labour's Lost, a critical play for authorship studies, begins on page 122. The early estimated date of composition, the insider court politics, English, French, and Russian, the rampant euphuism, the flagrant erudition, and so on, are, to state it mildly, difficult to shoehorn into the Stratfordian case. And while we're here, note the title misspelling on the catalog page. Here's the first page of the play with the correct spelling. And here's the gematria for the misspelled title, which conveniently results in geometric numbers of 96, 195, 1 plus 95 equals 96, using standard addition, or 69, using numerical sequential addition, once again connecting Oxford to God. Ignore spelling and compositional anomalies at your own risk. These so-called errors are frequently intentional. Now, moving on, the second folio, page 122, from the Histories, is in Henry VI, Part 2. The passage we're looking at is Gloucester's Dream, which juxtaposes the names Edmund and William, creates 2 spears by breaking the office staff, and unleashes a rather silly joke by putting William de la Pole's head on a pole. What makes this scene interesting is that in the quarto version, it is the Cardinal of Winchester, not Edmund, Earl of Somerset, who joins William in this portentous beheading dream. Again, referring back to my videos on the first folio, I discuss a similar change between quarto and folio in The Merry Wives, where Fair in the quarto changes to Edward in the folio. So assuredly, neither of these changes are the straw that will break the back in the authorship debate, but they are straws nevertheless. They're not the grasping type, mind you, and worthy of documentation. Page 122 of the first folio tragedy section is in Julius Caesar, and I humbly submit it is extraordinary. Here's a screenshot of the page to show the page number. I'll zoom into the 2 sections of focus, each in its turn. The first thing I like to point out is the line underlined in red. But here's a parchment with the seal of Caesar. So Catherine Children wrote an excellent article entitled Richard Brougham's The Antipodes and the English Earl. connecting Oxford to Caesar with contemporaneous or near contemporaneous references by Anthony Munday, Ben Jonson, and Richard Brome to Oxford as a Caesar. So we have a parchment, think manuscript, with the seal of Caesar, think real seal or some type of imprimatur of Oxford/Caesar. Following this line are 17, count them, 17 instances of the word will with a capital W. Note that using a facsimile of the first folio is critical here because there are two wills that are not capitalized, and later editors may not capitalize any of the wills except for the two that begin sentences. So leaning once again on Ben Jonson's admonition to look for the author in his book, I would place this scene a few notches below the Will Latin lesson in Merry Wives or Touchstone's dressing down of the peasant Will in As You Like It. But nevertheless, it is a compelling authorship clue. If watching a performance of the play, this relentless and possibly overlapping shouts of "The will! Read the will!" might not register, but in print, it's quite humorous and clearly intended to deliver a message. I'm hazarding a guess that you may never watch or read this scene again without marveling at the sheer wit of it. And just in case we missed it the first time, we are reminded again at the bottom of page 122 that the will, with a capital W, is under Caesar's seal. And there's also three other capitalized wills surrounding it. Then the last two lines of the page contain a total of 4 T's to signify the number 40. Parchment, the seal of Caesar twice, 17 capitalized wills, 4 more capitalized wills, then 4 T's. It's those Oxford geometric numbers 17 and 40, yet again. So, as we've seen, the number 122 is notable in the first folio, and my contention is that Oxford intentionally included 122 lines beginning with the letter O in the sonnets. But what does Sonnet 122 tell us? Surely after drawing attentive readers to the number 122 and the line count for the letter O for Oxford, our poet would not pass up the opportunity to impart extra meaning in this sonnet. We are not disappointed. In Sonnet 122, Oxford references tables that belong to, I'm arguing, God, that he creates, but because he and God are together in the creation of these works, they belong to God. Riverside glosses table as a tablet, and G.B. Harrison, in his edition, glosses it as a notebook. But I see no reason not to take the author at his word and use the definition of table as a chart of numbers and or letters, a definition that goes back to at least the age of Chaucer, according to the OED. As examples, we have the tables of Moses from the Bible, on which the 10 Commandments are inscribed, and we've got the periodic table of elements, which is still commonly referred to that today. It's not the periodic chart of elements, it's the periodic table of elements. These tables, and there are more than one, I'm showing one here in this video. In part 2, there are several more, are a gift to or from God, full of characters, letters, and numbers, committed to memory by the author, with, I would suggest, an additional reference to Giordano Bruno and his memory mnemonics. Words suggesting numbers are, forgive me, numerous in this poem. We've got table, rank, date, least, record, tallies, and score. Also, line 12, therefore to give them from me was I bold, is of particular interest. The line has been interpreted, by Harrison at least, as the poet giving away a notebook. But by rephrasing from me to you, I think we get a little closer to the real meaning. Oxford, I believe, is asking for God's pardon for revealing and leaving for posterity these tables of letters and numbers in his, God's, honor, as the poems are to Oxford's mind by both God and Oxford. John Dee's apology to God in the Monis Hieroglyphica is of a remarkably similar sentiment. The screenshot here is from Alexander Waugh's brilliant YouTube video, The Incalculable Genius of John Dee. So, we've already created one table of line first letters that, I hope, I've argued persuasively, demonstrates that Oxford was using numbers to connect himself to God in these extraordinary works of art. And lastly, here's more evidence of the importance of Sonnet 122 and Oxford's plea to God for forgiveness. Sonnets 120, 121, and 122 all begin with the letter T, a triple tau, a representation of the ternary. But notice the anomaly in the first line of Sonnet 122. There's an extra T in thy. There is far too much religious, proto-Masonic, and geometric messaging here for the standby compositor error or variable Elizabethan spelling excuses to hold water. The surreptitious second T in thy is, I would argue, a typographical representation of the quaternary hidden within the ternary, as well as yet another manifestation of one of Oxford's numbers, 40, 4T. Oxford, to understate matters, was as relentless as he was ingenious. So this ends part one. In the second part of this series, I will show you more tables that complement the line number tables shown here. These tables will reveal even more of the concealed messaging Oxford placed in the sonnets via the deliberate manipulation and organization of the sonnets' lines. Hint, part two will be brought to you by the letter T. I hope you will join me to see what else I've discovered, and thank you sincerely for watching.